Used to seeing Benedict Cumberbatch with superpowers and higher intelligence on screen, as Doctor Strange, Sherlock Holmes, even as Professor Alan Turing in The Imitation Game. But in his latest role, he plays a man who is broken by loss. In a television adaptation of Ian McEwan's novel The Child in Time, Cumberbatch is a successful children's books author who loses his 4-year-old daughter in a supermarket and never sees her again. Kelly MacDonald plays his wife, who can't forgive him. The film is a heartbreaking study of grief.
Not find her then?
Play your piano. What is it you want? You want me to give up?
Yes. I want you to give up. Because you always let me down. You never bring her home. And you're drinking too much.
I'm supposed to drink too much.
I can't live here anymore!
Kelly MacDonald and Benedict Cumberbatch, whose production company made this adaptation of The Child in Time. When he came to Front Row, I asked Benedict Cumberbatch why he was so keen on the McEwan story.
I'm a huge McEwan fan, and probably with Atonement I started to, the minute they came out I would read them that weekend. I had read a lot of his back catalogue, but funnily enough not The Child in Time, to my shame. And the script came to us, and as a production company, this is the first television venture we've ever had. I mean, it's a great career in itself. This is the first television adaptation of any McEwan novel. Obviously, he's been richly adapted in the past in cinematic form, as I've been lucky to be involved in with Atonement. I always feel very, very fortunate playing any character from a novel, but especially his work.
Well, in Atonement, Paul Marshall, particularly creepy, a key character in Atonement.
Absolutely.
One which apparently led
Stephen Moffat
to cast
Sherlock.
Is that true?
Which is, well, according to him, yeah. Right. I can't deny or verify that. If he said it, it's what he experienced. But
so Sherlock fans have McEwan in a way to thank.
Possibly, yeah. Why not? But yeah, he's a sublime novelist, and what a great opportunity to play an extraordinary character in an extraordinary novel, which at its time really made a mark. And was very much of its time. I mean, a slightly dystopian view of that present tense, and ours is not so concerned about that context, although politics does still come into it because it is about childhood, it's about parenting, and that goes cross-generationally, and also the state use of parenting or intervention with education.
But the politics have shifted, haven't they, between novel and television adaptation, because the time has shifted, because McEwan set it at the time in
very much
late 80s. It was a kind of indictment of Thatcherism in a way.
I think it probably, definitely.
Whereas this is not, and the Prime Minister that we meet is more Blairite in a way.
Possibly, yes. I think he probably is, but it's not supposed to be. The political sphere is to introduce relationships more than have some kind of lasting comment on policy, as the book did. And we purposely edited that down, as well as moving away from it being a historical drama, a period drama. We wanted to concentrate on the relationships of this seismic event.
Hey, darling, stand still. Wait for Daddy.
And pin number, please. OK, and remove your card.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Kate? Sorry. Kate? Kate, has anyone seen a little girl, a 4-year-old girl? She was wearing a yellow coat. No? Please? Kate? Kate! Kate!
And the key scene in the book early on, when Stephen, the novelist, loses sight of his daughter and she disappears, he turns his back for seconds. I mean, in those pages, you feel like the floor is falling from under you. It's a horrible feeling reading that scene. And so I guess one of the challenges was to get a sense of that absolute horror, which is felt by Stephen and then felt, of course, through the audience as well.
It happens so violently as well, in the sense that it's a normal morning and it turns on a second of not paying attention, a child going around a corner and disappearing forever. And it's a very strange place to occupy, especially when you're the responsible adult and it's your fault. It even further complexifies what is, in any circumstance, a horrific thing to contemplate.
And I guess for you, being a new parent as well.
It's an appalling thing to have to endure, and a very unnatural experience to lose a child. Definitely something you want to leave behind at work, for sure, if you are a parent.
And what's interesting, a lot of those early McEwan novels, there is a strangeness. There's a sense of disorientation,
absolutely,
and the unexplained, and the fact that things are left hanging.
Absolutely, and this sort of slightly extraordinary, magical otherness of time literally being warped to the extent that there's one passage where he thinks he sees his parents in a pub. His mother looks at him through this window when he's on his way to see his by then estranged wife, Julie, and he gets lost in the outskirts of where she's moved to, away from their flat in London, and comes across this pub and these people dressed in clothes that are not fitting to the now of the story, in the case of the book, a lot earlier, in the case of our time, around the 70s, when Stephen was conceived. And he finds a photograph in his parents' house, which validates that was indeed his mum he saw. And, they're sort of slightly extraordinary, uncanny happenings in the vein of a masterful storyteller like Stanley Kubrick, for example, in something like The Shining, where that's both... It's not out-and-out horror. These are sort of slips in time. Is it the madness of a man losing control in an isolated situation and the nuclear family being broken down through some external pressure, in that case isolation, in my character's case the tragedy of losing a child, that just can string out time and play with our consciousness and make things unconscious appear a reality.
This is your first outing as a producer, starring in this, but I mean, there's a raft of productions on the way, which all seem literary. The next one up, I mean, you've got the adaptation of the Edward St Aubyn series of novels, which again you're starring in.
Yes.
And a personal aspect to that, I mean, you're a big fan of those novels. That's a long-term ambition.
Absolutely, it was. I think, I don't have many roles I want to play, or things I at least would talk about in public that I'm interested in, but Hamlet was something that was in my subconscious for a while because of previous flirtations with it, and this series of books and this extraordinary character and the arc of his story,
this is Patrick Melrose.
Patrick Melrose, over these 5 incredible novels of searing wit and emotional authenticity and
semi-autobiographical as well, aren't they?
Yes, and the pain and beauty of this man seeking salvation from a very dark beginning in his childhood was utterly intoxicating. He writes with the wit and precision of even in war, and yet exposes this sort of depth charge of emotional trauma this child suffers when he's abused by his father in early childhood, and how he survives that.
And there are going to be 5 episodes based on 5 novels, and those, I mean, they span, 4 decades? They start in the 60s.
They do.
So you're going to have to age quite
There is a little bit of aging going on. Thank you. Yes, I will. There are days when I think that might be easier than others, but no, of course, it's an epic tale. It sweeps along spectacularly through this man's life.
Later in the year, you're also back on the big screen in The Current War.
Yes.
Now, this is about... You're playing Thomas Edison.
I am, yeah.
And so it's about the race to determine the standard delivery of electricity.
Yes. That's a great summation. I'm going to have to remember that when I'm trying to soundbite a very complex
It's AC/DC, isn't
story.
it? I mean,
it's AC versus DC, and nothing to do with the band. It's the story of 3 extraordinary men, the kind of Elon Musk and Zuckerberg and Bill Gates of their time, and it really is that exciting. It's that thrilling. It's moving from the age of gaslight into electricity, where we did this Promethean thing of creating day and night and upset circadian rhythms to an extent that I think we're still not evolved into understanding or really appreciating. And so we're trying to do a very modern look at what could be a period historical biopic and give it a freshness and vivacity and invigorate these characters and take them away from the stereotype we have of the white-haired Edison, the old man, the charmer, speaking in a loud voice because of his profound deafness, and trying to look behind the P.T. Barnum of it and examine the man who industrialised invention.
So we're expecting an electrifying performance from
God,
Benedict Cumberbatch. But it's interesting, you're playing another scientist there, aren't you? I mean, when you think about Alan Turing and The Imitation
But
Game.
a very different human being. This is the thing. It's not... I don't choose these things consciously. I think, well, yeah, let's get another scientist on the way. I mean, in fact, I'm quite consciously trying to avoid those. What interests me is the differences between these characters. And, I think the immediate Venn diagram on the CV gives light to something that's a little bit too
Does
simple
it happen
to
in that
join
way,
up.
though? I mean, we've talked about this before. When you were doing Turing, I remember we were talking about Sherlock and the parallels between the way that their brains worked. And then there was that diagrammatic way, which was represented in Sherlock on the screen.
Yeah.
But it's what Turing was doing at Bletchley on the board as well.
I think in people's minds when they come to me for a role, of course, because there's an element of which, well, he's the guy that does that. But, I
must
kick
be
against
really
that,
clever.
as I have done with the character of Stephen, this upper middle class writer who's very much a man that I brought myself to, including my own wardrobe, to try and fit into being in the skin of someone who is, for want of a better terms, a type of everyman, a type that we recognise. He is in an extraordinary situation, but not of the kind of level of being a sorcerer or a consulting detective or a maths genius who helps solve the riddle that helped us win a war. He's someone who is fighting a very quiet, very painful, very real and hopefully relatable battle to come to terms with something enormous in his life.
And bouncing between the big screen and the small screen very often. I mean, you
Yes.
talked about Hamlet, and that had been such a long-term ambition. So the next stage move, do you look...
No,
You're not one of those
I
actors
don't.
who thinks I have to go back to the stage every now and again to
Oh,
realign
yeah.
you.
There definitely comes a point where you think I need to go back to that gym. I need to work those muscles to continue that metaphor. But it is an acting gym. I mean, the requirements are utterly different, and a rehearsal period is a sort of incredible luxury where you're structuring an interpretation in a closed room before then presenting your work to a public, and all that gets condensed when you're doing film work. I've been very fortunate in a lot of recent instances to be able to have some composed time to rehearse things for the screen as well, but that's not always the case. For example, I've just come back from playing Stephen Strange again in the Infinity Wars, and they move very fast, the Russo brothers. You really have to hit the ground running, and that's kind of daunting when I haven't even been in that cloak for a good year and a bit. So it's a very different discipline, and I think the idea of performing live is something that is obviously ultimately very different and comes with its own challenges dependent on the scale of the role and the piece and the space that you're performing in. So
And is there a script waiting for you? Is there a theatre waiting for you?
Maybe. Not that I'd talk about now, but maybe. Look, I mean, it's all about timing, and I'm very aware of when I feel that I haven't been on stage for a time, and it's always something I want to come back to. So yeah, of course I will.
Benedict Cumberbatch, who stars in The Child in Time. It's on BBC One this Sunday at 9 o'clock.